Alright, now let's take a look at the principal virtues and vices. A truly virtuous action is performed by someone who is not simply compelled to do so. A person does a virtuous act and chooses to act in such a way as for the sake of being virtuous or virtuous. This choice comes from a certain firmness of character that is not easily swayed by one's passions or influenced by certain factors in a given situation. A virtuous person is someone who has been so used to acting virtuously that it becomes tremendously difficult for anyone or anything to convince him or her to do act otherwise. To a certain degree, vices are no longer an option for a truly virtuous person. Such a person actively keeps himself herself or herself disposed towards the mean by way of habituation. Only a virtuous person can perform truly virtuous actions, because he or she is initially predisposed towards virtue. Some actions are simply bad, and so there is no virtuous way of performing them. Acts like adultery, theft, and murder are bad and in themselves cannot be deemed virtuous in any situation. There is no right way of committing adultery with the right person or at the right time. Adultery is simply wrong. The mean only applies to actions and dispositions that are not bad in and of themselves. So here, let's take a look at the table of the principal virtues and vices. So at the middle, we have the following virtues. And if you are doing so, if you are exhibiting them, then you are called a virtuous person. But again, we go back to the definition or concept of being virtuous, and that is you exhibit or demonstrate such virtue in not a limited time or situations or chosen situations only, but this becomes your habit, okay, or a virtue that is being demonstrated all throughout. Now, if you exceed on such, okay, mean, that is considered a vice. And if you lack to such mean, then that is also considered as a vice. So let's start with the mean. Being courageous, okay, moderate, and we have liberality, magnificence, truthfulness, modesty, friendliness. So these are virtues, okay? And all virtues are positive, of course. The rashness, self-indulgence, prodigality, vulgarity, vanity, ambitiousness, and irascibility, okay? These are too much or exceeding to a certain mean, and they are called vices. Cowardice, insensibility, meanness, lack of ambition, lack of spirit, self-depreciation, and malice. So these are lacking to the mean and call it deficiency and also considered as vices. Now, for the last part of this presentation, we have the advantages of virtue ethics. The virtue ethics certainly didn't die away after Aristotle. Roman Stoics like Seneca and Marcus Aurelius also focused on character rather than abstract principles, and they too saw moral virtue as constitutive of the good life. That is, being a morally good person is a key ingredient of living well and of being happy. No one who lacks virtue can possibly be living well. Even if they have wealth, power, and lots of pleasure, later thinkers like Thomas Aquinas and David Hume also offered moral philosophies in which the virtues played a central role. But it is fair to say that virtue ethics took a back seat in 19th century and 20th century. The revival of virtue ethics in the mid-late 20th century was fueled by dissatisfaction with rule-oriented ethics and a growing appreciation of some of the advantages of an Aristotelian approach. These advantages included the following. First, virtue ethics offers a broader conception of ethics in general. It means it doesn't see moral philosophy as confined to working out with actions, which actions are right and which actions are wrong. It also asks what constitutes well-being or human flourishing. We may not have a duty to flourish in the way we have a duty not to commit murder, but questions about well-being are still legitimate questions for moral philosophers to address. Secondly, virtue ethics avoids the inflexibilities of rule-oriented ethics. According to Kant, for instance, we must always and in every circumstance obey his fundamental principle of morality, his categorical imperative. This led him to conclude that one must never tell a lie or break a promise. But the morally wise person is precisely the one who recognizes when the best course of action is to break the normal rules. Virtue ethics offers rules of thumb, not iron rigidities. Lastly, virtue ethics, because it is concerned with character, with what kind of person one is, it pays more attention to our inner states and feelings as opposed to focusing exclusively on actions. For a utilitarian, what matters is that you do the right thing. That is, you promote the greatest happiness of the greatest number, or follow a rule that is justified by this goal. But as a matter of fact, this is not all we care about. It matters why someone is generous or helpful or honest. The person who is honest simply because they think being honest is good for their business is less admirable than the person who is honest through and would not cheat a customer, even if they could be sure that no one would ever find them out. Virtue ethics has also opened the door to some novel approaches and insights pioneered by feminist thinkers who argue that traditional moral philosophy has emphasized abstract principles over concrete interpersonal relationships. The early bond between mother and child, for instance, could be one of the essential building blocks of moral life, providing both an experience and an example of loving care for another person. Now, to sum it up and in conclusion, ethics is a matter of living well through the habitual practice of virtue, which essentially translates into having a virtuous or excellent character. Happiness, being the chief good of the human person, is attainable through the proper exercise of reason, both morally and intellectually. Eudaimonia is an activity of the soul that purposively attempts to choose the mean between two extremes in the realm of morality. And lastly, Aristotle teaches us that character is the most essential component of ethics. A virtuous character is the result of the proper combination of practical wisdom, or the phronesis, and habituation, or ethos, in the pursuit of the mean, or mesotis. So with that, thank you for playing the video and listening to the explanation or discussion of this presentation, and I hope you were able to pick up something. And if there are some questions or clarifications, then feel free to message me in Canvas or either in Messenger. Okay, thank you, and I hope you learned something from this presentation, and goodbye.